Hello and welcome back to Raise the Trident. My name is Jake, and today we're doing kind of a similar State of the Union that I did with Jay a few months ago. We're doing this now that we're at the All-Star break, so the first half is done. I have a couple new guests who have not been on my channel before, starting with MarinersSUR. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
And we also have Trevor from the Sodo Mojo Podcast as well. Hi, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, so I wanted to do this because, we're done with the first half, and I think this is a good time to kind of check the temperature of how the team's doing and the organization as a whole, and what kind of our thoughts are about how we've been performing, because it's certainly been polarizing, to say the least. We're at the All-Star break. Going into it, we have a record of 52-46 and have a 1-game lead on the AL West. So right now, I guess, just what is your current opinion about the Mariners record and the lead on the division? How are you feeling having that 1-game lead going into the All-Star break? We'll start with MarinersSUR.
Yeah, I think going into the year, I would have probably taken a 1-game lead at the All-Star break. So I think on a macro level, I feel, good about it from that standpoint. But kind of how we got here recently, there's definitely some concerning things. The offense has been an issue really all season long. We built that lead. We did some good things, but a lot of it was on the Astros just not playing well at all, and they've kind of figured things out. And so there's just not a lot of a good momentum. But I mean, baseball's a weird sport. I've been on plenty of teams where, it looks like things are just not going well. Then all of a sudden it clicks one game and you play well. And so there's, I think, about 65 games left. And so now we're into a fairly short season. And I think we do have, talent on the roster to pull out of it. And I'm sure some additions coming soon. So, but I do think the first 10 games out of the break are very, very important. So, feel good with a 1-game lead. But yeah, I mean, the play's just been very uninspiring lately. And with the Astros, kind of catching their momentum as well, there's definitely a lot of concern there as well. So very hopeful in the week or two out of the break that we'll look like a different team and maybe can build up another 2 or 3 game lead from there.
Yep, I definitely agree. And how are you feeling, Trevor?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. It's the context, right? I think if you tell us at the beginning of the season that we get to the All-Star break and we're in first place in the AL West, I think we're happy with that regardless of what it looks like or how it gets there. But now that we're here, there's a lot of that frustration that can come around of how we got there. There's a saying in golf, right, that there's no pictures on the scorecard. It feels very similar, right, with this, where it's like, hey, if we just look at the standings, where we're at, 65 games left, that's a lot of baseball, right? There's a lot of things coming down the pike. And I do think I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I do think that the players have talked about at, many times throughout the last couple of seasons, that how the team acts during the deadline actually does a lot for the team morale. So 2 years ago, you see them go get Luis Castillo. Look at how that team responded. They said, man, this team believes in us. The front office believes in us. They're going to invest into this season. And then look what they did. Look how they finished. And then on the flip side, look at last year. We get to the deadline. Organization doesn't know. Are we going to sell? Are we going to buy? Are we going to go on a run, or are we going to tank? We were kind of in the worst of both worlds, honestly, and playing that limbo. And then the organization decides to sell light, right, and get rid of Paul Sewald and restock with some bats. And looking back, that was a savvy move. I think it was a good move overall. But look at the fallout. The players interpreted that as a sell move, and then they just didn't finish the season strong. Obviously, we had the really hot, end of July, August. But then once we got to September and those games mattered, they just ran out of gas. And I think if the organization goes and buys right now, if we go get a Luis Robert Jr., we go get Jazz, we go get Tanner Scott, we go add a couple of big pieces. And it has to be more than one, by the way. If it's just Jazz, that's a problem. But if they go add big in the next 2 weeks, I think that drastically changes. But yeah, you're right. I think the series right out the gate, I think honestly, this might be a little bit, morbid or maybe a hot take, but I think whoever wins this series this coming weekend is going to who's going to win the division. Honestly, I think it's going to be, obviously there's a lot of baseball. Lots of things could happen between now and then, but we knew we had to get a big lead on Houston and Texas early on in the season when they had injuries piling up and all of that. We did that. And then we proceeded to piss it down our leg three weeks later. So my State of the Union of where we're at as a team I totally agree. I'm happy we're in first, but simultaneously, I'm also like, man, they need to actually invest in this thing. And the fact that Jerry and Scott's contract ends at the end of this season lends to the fact that they're going to go big, hopefully.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and it's a really interesting conversation to have because there is, the side of we are in first place. If I told you that we were going to be in first place come the All-Star break, regardless of how many games it was, I think we all would, sign the dotted line on however we do that. However, the context of it is your team is clearly has some absolutely enormous holes like that cannot be I guess not addressed or omitted from the fact that we're in first. We have to talk about that. We have to try to understand what the issue is and try to address it, because if this team is going to have a really strong playoff run, which I think they can, especially with the pitching they have,
Totally.
if they can get some good pieces on the offensive side, once you get into October, literally anything can happen. Baltimore is a juggernaut, sure. Yankees are really good. Anything can happen in October. We saw it last year with the Diamondbacks. They are like literally the perfect example. No one thought they were going to beat the Braves. No, or I don't think they beat the Braves. No one's thought they were going to beat the Phillies, which I certainly didn't. And then they sweep the Phillies, I think. So it's just like you never know what's going to happen. So you want to get the best pieces you can. I think I'm a little worried about how much we're going to be able to get or how much quality we're going to be able to get, but we'll get into that. So as far as specific performance goes, I want to start a bit positive. We're going to talk about the pitching staff because it's been one of the best in the majors. As of today, they lead the league in quality starts, hits allowed, walks, batting average against, whip, and our top 5 in ERA. So yeah, what's our takes as far as the pitching staff and how they've performed in the first half of the year? We'll start with Trevor this time.
Yeah, I think the pitching has been what we thought it was going to be. I think a lot of us, all of the baseball, Mariners community was talking in the offseason that we were going to be a top 5 rotation in baseball. The national media didn't necessarily prescribe to that until, about a month before. But I think they've held the billing. I think there's definitely room for improvement. We've seen, really stretches where, Castillo had a rough couple weird games. Even Kirby's last start was kind of shaky, had 2 walks, like didn't look great, but finished strong. But the thing is we're so spoiled. I'm going to use the Jeff Passan, right? Like we are so spoiled where I've heard Mariners fans that are complaining because Emerson Hancock only went 4 innings and gave up 2 runs. I'm like, guys, that's a 6th starter. That's a replacement guy. And we're like, he's 2 innings away from a quality start. And we're like, how dare this guy not, it's like, what are we doing? Like our 5 starter is Brian Wu, when he's healthy and going full tilt, he's a 2-3 in most rotations in baseball. Like we're talking about a 1 through 5 that has a chance to be generational talent, and their win-loss record will look a heck of a lot better if our offense just was even league average. And so for me, yeah, you're ripping off all these stats of whip and ERA and walks per 9 and strikeouts per 9. Like, these guys are doing everything we were hoping they were going to do. And if the offense even remotely played to their baseball card, this wouldn't even be we'd just be singing from the rooftops. But we're only 1 game up in the AL West because our offense can't get their stuff together on a regular basis. I think the pitching has been great. Our bullpen is the place where I'm like, that's where I'm a little sketchy. Obviously Voth had a good couple months, and then all of a sudden the last 2 have not been great. It's like I feel like that needs more bolstering personally. But I think our pitching has been fine. I think our pitching has been what we thought it was going to be. And I agree with you. If you want to win a World Series, you got to have good starting pitching and defense. We have that covered. Our offense just needs to do anything, and we should be fine.
Yep, exactly. And how are you feeling, MarinersSUR?
Yep, I'd agree. I think going into the year, I felt really, really good about the pitching. And like, especially like the bullpen too. Like, when we had Santos, Brash, Munoz, I felt good about that. Then 2 go down. So, the bullpen, I did have some concern going into the season with that just due to the injuries. And I thought they, kind of held their own, and getting Santos back certainly helps in that regard. And I think even, my concerns with the bullpen are just kind of like, I think Trevor alluded to, just the length of it. And you certainly need that length, I think, to get through these next 65 games. So I think adding a bullpen piece is definitely would be a prudent move. But, get into the playoffs and you don't have to really use those fifth, sixth, seventh best relievers. You can kind of go Munoz, Santos game by game. So I think if we get there, we're in a great shape. And then you can even move one of your starters, into the bullpen as well. But yeah, I mean, the rotation's been fantastic. I know even like the Woo start on, what was that, Friday, he let up 4 runs or whatever it was, and it just felt like the worst start ever. And it's like most teams have to deal with that probably once a week, but it just felt so bad because we just do not ever see that. But I mean, it's just, I think it's one of the reasons that if we can get a league average offense, no team would want to face us in the playoffs because the pitching is just so dominant that, I mean, they can shut down anyone when they're on their game. So yeah, I couldn't feel better about the pitching, honestly. So yeah, I think you go get a bullpen piece to kind of hopefully lengthen that a little bit. Hopefully the starters can stay healthy, and with, Castillo, Kirby, and Castillo, Kirby, and Logan Gilbert is the front 3. It doesn't get any better than that. I mean, they can absolutely dominate really any game they're out there. So yeah, I feel really good about the pitching.
Yep, and I'm in the same camp. At least when it comes to our starters, I think they've all exceeded their expectations. Probably even Logan Gilbert. I mean, he's a legit Cy Young candidate this year, and he's an All-Star. Luis Castillo's been fine. He's been Luis Castillo. It feels like he hasn't necessarily been Cy Young contender this year, but he's still been solid. Kirby had a couple rough starts towards the start of the season, and then he's really locked it down over like the last 2.5 months. He's been just lights out. Bryce Miller, like, he can be shaky, especially on the road. We know his road ERA is a lot higher than at the home, but I mean, you have to take it in that context of he is a number 4 starter, and for a number 4 starter, he's a lot better than a lot of other 4 starters. And he's this is his second year, really year and a half in the league, I guess. So, gotta like that. And Brian Wu, if he could just stay healthy, which I hope he can. Personally, I've always been a bit higher on Wu than Miller in the long run term. So hopefully he can get healthy. I'm really excited for him next year. I'll tell you that, because if he can keep his injuries in check, I think he's going to have a monster season. And then as far as the bullpen, like, they've kind of what you said, MarinersSUR is like, they've held their own in the midst of being as shorthanded as they have. We're not going to get Brash this year. We finally got Santos back, but we've only pitched him twice. So, hard to know for sure what we're going to get with him, but so far it's looking good. I definitely think we need that high leverage piece, and that's probably the only thing you really need, is just that one extra high leverage piece. I really like Scott from the Marlins, because it'd be nice to have a high leverage lefty if Spire doesn't bounce back when he comes back, because obviously he was kind of shaky before he went down with injury, and who knows how long the injury's really going to sideline him. But once you get into the playoffs, like, hypothetically, if you get in the playoffs, obviously we can't say for sure if we will, you have to understand that those first couple rounds in the playoffs, you're really only pitching Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, and then I think you move Miller and Wu to the pen. That immediately takes out guys like Bauman and, I guess Snyder, or both, whoever you really want to pick. And those 2 dudes can help you a lot in the plan, I would imagine. And then once you get to like the championship and the World Series, I mean, you're probably pitching Miller at least. I don't know if you pitch Wu your whole 5, because I think it just makes more sense to at least get Castillo that, 5th start if you can. But even then, you still have one of Miller or Wu in the pen to help out. So I feel really good about it. I mean, obviously, they've been one of the best pitching staffs in Mariners history. I looked up the stats. Like, they are leading in Mariners franchise history in a lot of different things, especially I think it was like hits and ERA and all that stuff. So can't really be upset about them, I would say.
Jake, are you worried that they're going to run out of gas like they did last year? Like, are you worried about that at all with the innings that they've already been running up, or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, so I mean, it's hard to say, because, with Miller, I think he'll be fine. In this, the only part with Miller for me is not the gas, it's just the fact that, like, he needs to still find that extra, he needs to adjust to the league because they've adjusted to him, it feels like, very clearly recently. So he needs to find that new weapon. Whether that's, I mean, the splitter's feels like pretty good this year so far. I don't know if he needs to just throw that more than his fastball, not more, but like more often than he has been recently. And then for Wu, like with him being down, I think that'll help during the stretch, honestly, because if he can come back 100%, which I mean, he's back now. He had that couple weeks off. He's still pretty low on innings. So, I mean, if Miller's having problems, then, you know, it's hard to say because Hancock's also been in more often than not doing the job that he's supposed to do when he comes up. So, I don't know if I would say gas is a problem. I think it's just more of keeping everyone healthy at this point because obviously Wu has his concerns and Miller never has had any, but you know, it's like one of those things with pitching injuries. You just never know when it's going to happen. And if it happens, it's going to be, you know, a big problem. But what do you think as far as, I guess either of you can answer that question too, as far as the gas and the stamina of the pitching staff? We'll go with MarinersSUR for this one.
I mean, a little bit. I know last year they were, if I recall correct, I think in August they were going to go to like a six-man rotation for a few weeks, and then Hancock got hurt. So I wonder if they would maybe do something like that again, just because, you know, Miller's, I guess, first full season in the MLB, although he was called up pretty early last year, and then with the Wu injury concerns, you know, with Castillo, Kirby, and Gilbert, not as much, but then Gilbert does lead the league in innings pitch. I think that is a kind of interesting concern and thought. But if they all stay healthy, I could see him maybe going to a six-man rotation for a few weeks, just in like that mid-August stretch, just to try to get everybody fresh going into September. So yeah, I don't think it'd be a bad idea because you definitely want to keep them fresh down the stretch run. So I think last year they did hit a little bit of a wall. That last few weeks we just didn't see the, you know, great starts that we were accustomed to. Like I know Castillo had 2 or 3 rough ones, and I don't recall how the other ones did, but yeah, might be something worth considering for sure.
Yeah. It's not something I'm terribly concerned about, but when you're looking at total innings pitched, our starters are by far the most in the league. And that's, I mean, a testament to how good they've been pitching, right? The reason why they've been pitching as many innings as they've been throwing is because they're throwing quality starts almost every single day. So of course they're going to be going more innings than anybody else. And then health wise as well, right? Wu's been the only one, right? Knock on wood, that's, you know, had many issues throughout the year. But yeah, we did see, and I was very concerned. Castillo in September took a very obvious velo dip, right? He was down 3 to 4 miles per hour and then got shelled. And so I am worried that when the pitching matters, right? When it really comes down to it, because even right now, I'm like, whoever doesn't win the AL West between us and Houston, I don't know if they make the playoffs, right? Looking at where the wild card is. And I think whoever wins the AL West, obviously they're going to be in, have home field advantage for the first round, et cetera, right? But if you don't win the AL West, like, do we get in with it with a wild card? I don't know if we do. And so for me, I think we have to push all the chips into winning the division. And I think that, however, I love the idea of going to a 6-man. I honestly thought we should have gone to a 6-man almost towards the beginning. Like I would have been fine with the 6-man rotation to start with to get Hancock in because he's been fine. Again, if Hancock's going to give you 5 innings of 2-run ball, I'll take that every day and twice on Sunday, once every 6 starts. But as it sits right now, our starters have about 10 starts left between all of them, right? Per guy. And you go, there's a lot that can happen between now and then. And for me, I want them to be sharp. I mean, I posted something on our page I think it was last week, where I said, man, think about our playoff rotation. If we have a healthy Castillo, Kirby, Gilbert, and then we have Miller and Wu coming out of the pen, holy crap. Like there's no off days. You have 3 aces going at you day after day after day. And I love our chances if we can get to the postseason, but that if is that if has dwindled with our lead, you know, where we go from 10 to 1 in a span of 4 weeks. So I am a little worried about the gas. And even right now, this last week, they weren't incredibly sharp. You know, even Kirby wasn't that sharp as, 2 days ago. So there's just a lot left, a lot left on that bone. And Houston feels like they're just getting stronger. Now, granted, their starting pitching they're in a bad spot. So if they're going to do anything, their offense is going to have to keep it up.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, to move away from the pitching, we're now going to focus on the juiciest topic, the offense. So we're going to get, a bit more negative here. So they've been on the opposite end of the spectrum than the pitching. They've been legitimately terrible so far this season. Not going to sugarcoat any words here. You can argue that they've been one of the worst offenses potentially in franchise history, unfortunately, which is crazy with the talent that I think they have. But just so many people underperforming. They're on pace to strike out more than any team in the live ball era. That's a legit stat that I have looked up, which is since 1920. So if that doesn't make you feel great, then I don't know what will. But yeah, so I guess just general thoughts on the offense and kind of what we think needs to happen going forward here. We'll start with MarinersSUR on this one.
Yeah, offense has been rough, like you said. It has not been good. And I think one of the things most fans all year have kind of said, like, we need, if Julio doesn't get going, the offense is in trouble. So I think one positive is over the last week or two, Julio has looked like the Julio we want. I mean, he's spraying balls all over the field with, power. He's kind of started lifting balls a little bit more. And I think that's a very encouraging sign in regard to the offense going into the second half, because if he can be kind of the superstar that we need, that, I think that goes a fairly long ways to fixing kind of what ailed the offense, to be honest. And then, Cal Raleigh's been kind of up and down, but, he kind of reminded everyone again what he can do when he catches fire. So I think that's two good things is Julio and Cal seem to be trending in the right direction. Beyond that, JP's kind of regressed a little bit from last year, not a little bit, quite a bit. So we need him to kind of pull back and be a above league average bat. And then beyond that, the role players have been okay. Like, Rojas got off to a great start, but he's fallen off a little bit. So you hope that he can, have another good streak in him. Luke Raley's been kind of fine, what you would hope. But there does, in my opinion, needs to be probably 3 additions on offense. I think a couple everyday players, and then, maybe one role type player that's a platoon bat or whatever it may be. And I don't know if there's going to be a ton of impact that's available, but I use Victor Robles as an example. Sometimes you don't need to go get the big name. It's just bringing somebody in that has some talent and seeing if you can, find something with him. He's been, a tremendous addition. And, they brought him in to hit left-handers, and now as he's got opportunity, he's, hit right-handers as well. But yeah, so for me, it comes down to, can, Julio and Cal kind of hit in the middle of the order and be productive? Can your role players continue, to post a league average bat in the second half, as a lot of them done, primarily Rojas and Rayleigh, who I'm speaking to? And then, can you go get 3, likely 3 bats via trade? I think, hopefully one's a big addition, one's kind of middle of the road. Like I said, the others may be a kind of a more of a role player, but they've got to get some new bats in there to replace some of the ones that have been, kind of a black hole in the lineup. So I do have some hope for him. Like I said, if Julio catches fire, he can all but carry an offense by himself, but he's not going to do it for all 65 games in the back half. That's just way too big of an ask. So he's going to need others to step up and kind of help carry the team when he does have a week or 2 stretch where, he's trying to find a swinger or whatever it may be. So definitely we need to see a big improvement from there. And I think, as Trevor alluded to, if it's even a league average offense with our pitching, it might be good enough to win the division. It may have to be a little bit better than that, just because Houston is right there with us. So, but I don't think they need to be, a top 8 offense to necessarily win the division with our pitching. So it's just a matter of, can they kind of get to that threshold of where we're not all sitting here game after game, just so frustrated because they're scoring 1 run, 2 run, whatever it may be. They've got to be a lot better than that. So hopefully they can be, but time will tell.
For sure. Yeah, I think any offense that has Dylan Moore playing 6 out of 7 games every week is not a good offense. The fact that Dylan Moore led our team in extra base hits with 25 as long as he did, listen, Dylan is a really good super utility player. I really like Dylan Moore, and if he's coming off the bench and he's playing 2-3 games a week max, and he's giving guys rest days all over the field, I think that's a perfect fit and exactly what we need from him. He's an impact guy on the base paths, obviously. He does have little pockets where he can catch on fire. He has my favorite grand slam of all time against Houston, right? Like, I like Dylan Moore, but any offense where he's playing every day, that's a problem. That's a problem. And so even as MarinersSUR, as you're talking, I'm like, man, if we brought in 3 new bats, like who are we sending down or dropping, right? And I think that's the harder part of this conversation that I'm sure Jake is getting to in this is everyone likes to talk about if we add Luis Robert Jr. like fun. If we add a couple more guys, like who, that's phenomenal. Who are we dropping? That conversation sucks, right? Because we were all super pumped when Haniger got signed. I was one of them. That's the downside of doing a podcast, right? Is everybody has the receipts of what I was saying earlier in the year. I loved getting Haniger for the vibes, for his leadership, for his work ethic, the veteran presence that we didn't have really last year that we needed in the clubhouse. And so I was really pumped. Now, I didn't want to see Haniger play 120 games, right? I really didn't. When they brought him in, I was like, hey, maybe 80 games max, right? Like a real halftime, platoon player where I was hoping him and Canzone or him and Rayleigh were going to, platoon each other. And he's just played a lot more than I really wanted him to, both for injury's sake, but also production wise. So you look at Haniger, it kind of feels like that's the name that's the biggest on the chop block other than Polanco. Now Polanco and him, Mitch has a player option at the end of this year for what, 20 mil for next season. He's not going to drop that, right? So it's going to be an expensive cut if that's the direction that we go. I don't know if another team is going to want to pull on that contract, right? So it feels like we're either stuck, either paying the contract or keeping him on. Polanco, we're kind of in the same boat. So you're looking at those two guys as the biggest guys you're going to replace. And then obviously we can always send Canzone down, right? He has options. So we're good with that. And send down Canzone to really find a more consistent bat. So if you had to ask me, like, what 3 guys are we looking to replace? Those are probably the 3. And I think if we brought in a Luis Robert Jr. and a Jazz, and then, another like low key, positional player that just is, whatever, like that would be phenomenal. But how do we get there? And then do they have the cojones to actually do it? Right. That's kind of where we're at. So the not fun part of this conversation is it's fun around the trade deadline to talk about what players we're going to go get. But on the back end, there's a player that's getting DFA'd, traded, whatever. And that part of the conversation, that's not as fun. And then also what prospects are we losing in the meantime? But I'm not one of the guys, and I talk about this all the time, is that our prospect clutching needs to stop in Seattle, right? We're always so worried that we're going to get rid of the next Adam Jones or whatever, right? Like I understand, but all the best teams, look at the Dodgers, man. Every single year they're trading away prospects to try to add at the deadline to go win another World Series. Like competent, good organizations, they use prospects the way that they're supposed to. Guess what? Yordan Alvarez was a Dodger, right? They missed on Yordan Alvarez. That sucks. I don't hear any Dodgers fans every year like clutching about how they missed out on Yordan and how much they, you know what I mean? Like they that was a price that they were willing to pay to get in contention the way they are every freaking fall. So for me, I would rather have an organization that's willing to use prospects the way that they're meant to be used to augment your offense in a season like this that's worth pushing all in. And like I mentioned earlier, that I don't really see a lot of people talking about, honestly, with Jerry and Scott's contract expiring in 2024. I think that's going to play a really big part in the next couple of weeks. If they had been extended and they had a couple more years of runway, I don't know if they'd be as aggressive as I think they're going to be, because if we miss the playoffs, our fans, podcast, all of us, we're all going to be demanding their jobs. And I think they know that.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And, with the hitting, it's so interesting because coming into this season, I personally thought that on paper, I really like this offense. I loved the additions of Jorge Polanco and Mitch Garver, and they've both been below league average. Jorge has been way below league average, unfortunately. But it's not only been those guys failing, it's been some of your core pieces have just been either just not good this year, or they have been a lot like kind of a shell of themselves, I guess is the best way to put it. Like Julio, he had like an 80 something WRC plus for a while. His most recent stretch, he's a bit above, he's like 102 right now. JP is below that line. So it's not only the additions that came in that are not playing well, it is your core pieces that you are relying on to kind of be that engine of the offense. So you can't give it all to just I guess oh, Jerry, you picked the wrong person again, which I mean is true, I guess, with Jorge Polanco, which is like breaks my heart because I thought he was going to be like the game changer this year. But you know, it is what it is on that front. But yeah, it's just like what I can't tell what the problem is. Like they tried to cut down on strikeouts. They got some guys that are okay with strikeouts, and now, like I said, we're on track to have the most strikeouts in live ball era history. It's like, how does this happen? I don't know. I personally think when we're going to like the organization front, I've kind of been at the point now where I think at least at the end of the season, they just need to like gut the hitting department. Like I feel bad for calling for people's jobs. I don't like being that person. Something's clearly not working and has not really been working well for the last couple of seasons now, at least. And it's not going to be just a Brant Brown that clearly that, you know, is going to be the solving of these problems, but something is not clicking. And why these guys, especially like a Jorge Polanco, who has a literal decade of being an above average hitter, comes here and falls off a cliff. That's not him turning 30 like some people have suggested before. Like I get that, you know, when you turn 30 you got to start expecting a bit of a decline, going from 118 average WRC plus to 86 or whatever he's at right now. I think it's actually lower. I think it's like in the 60s. I mean, that's not aging. Like that is something is fundamentally wrong. Now, do I know exactly what that fundamentally wrong thing is or what's going on in that hitting department that is part of the reason why this is happening? I don't know. But it's just a matter of, since I don't know, I'm just going to say something is wrong. Something needs to change. That needs to be one of those things that changes this offseason, honestly, regardless if they make the playoffs or not, because the offense has been historically terrible this year. It's been good to see Julio finally turning it around. It seems like, you know, he still has those games where he gets the golden sombrero and you're like, oh gosh, is he actually back? Or is, you know, is he just getting hot for a small stretch now? I would like to have faith and I'll be optimistic that he is going to have a good, you know, second half of the season. But even then, you still need guys like Cal Raleigh. You still need guys like JP Crawford to do their job realistically, because you can't just keep having guys like Josh Rojas and Victor Robles be the engines of the offense. Like they are role players. That is what they are supposed to be. They are doing great for their role, and they've been very helpful, and I want them to keep producing well. But the fact that our offense is at this point literally relying on only them, that's not a recipe for success.
Do you guys remember Robles? Do you remember Robles' first game? Where he like dropped that foul fly that like barely touched it?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so bad. And then he had like a really bad strikeout with guys in running. Like it was like, I remember thinking after that first game, I was like, oh dude, he's gonna be DFA'd tomorrow. And then now I'm like, I literally said the other day, I'm like, there's no reason why he shouldn't be in the lineup every day. It's like, wow, what a change in narrative in the last couple of months.
Things changed quickly, but it's like I can't expect Victor Robles to have a 200 WRC plus for the last 60 games. No, that's not going to happen. And it happened the other night. There was like that ninth inning, we had a couple runners on to win a game against the Angels, mind you, and our top three in the order, KK ground out or something like that.
Yep. It's like, the clutch. It's the clutch factor. I mean, honestly, the big thing missing, like we're filling up the base paths. We're getting opportunities. It's not like we're getting one hit, right? It's not like we're not getting guys on. I mean, what was that game that we had we had the bases loaded in the 7th, 8th, and 9th against the Blue Jays? Yeah, I was furious.
3 different times.
I was so pissed. I don't know if I've actually been more pissed at a game. I mean, the Twins Sunday game a couple weeks ago, that one ticked me off too. But that Toronto game where we had the bases loaded, the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning, and then we lost because we went to extras, and then they were. I was when you have the opportunities, like just do the little things well. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I don't know. I can't remember what I want to give them a shout out. Doggone it. There's somebody that talks about all the time. That's one of the Mariners voices that we have in our community here. That like, I just hate their 2-strike approach. So me and Ethan are coaches, right? We talk about that at the beginning of our show every week. Like I coach high school baseball, and in baseball, just in general, if a guy has 2 strikes, you tell them like, hey, you know what? If it's the first pitch and it's the first strike you're seeing, feel free to swing out of your shorts. It does not matter. Swing super hard, because guess what? If you catch it, fun things are going to happen. Great. But if you miss, no big deal. When you have a 2-strike count, it does not matter if it's 1-2 or 0-2 or 3-2. It doesn't matter. You shorten up and you try to find a barrel. And that's all you got to do. Find a barrel, shorten up, don't try to do too much, and just put it in play. And Julio, I think the biggest reason why he struggled is because in 2-strike counts, he's still swinging like he's trying to hit it into CenturyLink when we just need we just need a gap shot. We don't need a huge home run. And he still does it even after he's like approached the game differently and all the things that he's saying, that he's, playing pissed off instead of, which I do love. I'm like, you don't need to be the nice guy all the time. You can play pissed off, Julio. Like, that's fine. But I just get really frustrated when I see Josh Rojas. I'm a huge Josh Rojas. Me and Ethan joke about it all the time. I'm a huge Rojas guy. He's a huge Rayleigh guy. So we're always going back and forth. Rojas all of a sudden has stopped going from his like, hey, I'm just going to get what they give me. I'm going to find a gap here. All of a sudden, he's swinging out of his shorts with 2 strikes too. And I'm like, guys, this is just baseball 101. This is taught from little league all the way through college. It doesn't change when you get to the pros. If you have 2 strikes, shorten up. We don't need a bomb every time you're at the plate. Now, do we love that? Yes. But man, when you have 2 strikes, just shorten up and just take what they give you. Don't swing out of your shorts. It's just, and it's not just Julio and it's not just Rojas. Like Rayleigh, all of a sudden, he had a really rough couple game stretch. He's doing the same thing. You have 2 strikes and he's swinging out of his shorts at an 80-mile-an-hour changeup on the outside corner. Like, just put it the opposite way. They know how to do that. They are capable of doing that.
Yep, I definitely agree. And I would say to the same effect is that last year I had this same frustration. At the time, I wasn't like making YouTube videos or anything, but I was like, I was watching these games and there was so many times where I'm like, okay, we just need a sac fly. That's all we need. Just hit it to the outfield and you score a run right here. And it's just K. Or it's like, it's just this struggle to even just put balls in play.
Right.
Especially when runners are on. Here's my thing, right? Like, if there's runners in, let's say the bases are loaded, okay? And it's time to score a run. Even if you just hit a really hard grounder, like, I will take that over striking out, because at least you gave like an opportunity for something to happen and
Correct.
you got unlucky or whatever. But it's like, when I see you, especially the other night against the Angels, and you strike out 2 times at the top of the order, JP, and I think it was Julio. I mean, at that point, you can't even get a sac fly at that point. And that's all you need to do. You just need to get the bat on the ball, get it in the foul lines, and something will happen. And we've seen that multiple times this year. That's why we call it chaos ball, right? Is the times when they are putting just getting the ball in play and letting the defense make the play. They're not always going to.
Cal's infield single walk-off where he squibbed it just past the pitcher. Weird.
Exactly.
You put him in play, good things happen.
Exactly. So it's just so frustrating, and it's obviously definitely an approach thing. I agree that like the approach has been terrible, and it's funny because every time they get a hit, they do that like square thing, right? Means like the ball was where I wanted it to. How many times have I watched them stare at a slider down the middle of the plate? Is that not the time to swing with like for the first strike or the second strike? What does the square mean then if you're not going to literally swing at the cookies in the middle? Like, it makes no sense to me.
And we're not even talking about the 94-mile-an-hour fastballs that are literally as middle gets, and we foul it off 50 times.
Yeah,
exactly. It's so frustrating because like I felt at the start of the season, I still feel now that like the talent is in this team. They have talented players. It's just there is something fundamentally wrong with the way they either plan for the offense, or there's just something in the whole offensive, I guess, machine that is the Seattle Mariners. There is some cogwheel that is off axis and they just cannot figure it out. It's just so frustrating when they acquire guys like Garver and Polanco and it just doesn't work out when they should be. I mean, Garver's maybe a bit spotty sometimes, but guys like Polanco, where he should slot right in and be fine because he has been his whole career. But I don't know, but we'll move on from the offensive part of just that. Now we'll get into what do we need to happen with the offense? What moves need to be made? We can talk all day about the free agents or the trades or whatever. Obviously, we know Jazz Chisholm, Luis Robert, maybe Vlad Guerrero, but probably not. But I thought you brought up a good point, Trevor, earlier. Let's talk about what just internally can we do to help this offense now, and what are our suggestions outside of just trades to help. And I guess we'll start with MarinersSUR on this one.
Yeah, so in terms of like what we have internally, I don't know if there's a ton that they can do. I think at like maybe first base you give Tyler Locklear a chance. Just Ty France has kind of continued his struggles, which is unfortunate because a couple of years ago he was such a fun hitter to watch. It hit 300, didn't strike out, just bat to the ball. Wasn't like a huge home run hitter for a first baseman, but it didn't bother me. He was still very, very productive, but he's just kind of gotten away for that for whatever reason. And it just doesn't seem like it's getting much better. So maybe you give Locklear a chance. I'm not exactly sure, but I do really think it's going to have to come via trades. But unfortunately, I just don't know with the third wild card now, there's just not going to be a ton of supply out there on the market, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't try something. You got guys like Ryan Bliss that are up that are barely playing, Jonathan Clase. So I think there's maybe a couple guys that if we do acquire, they can go down to Tacoma, and they're young players who can hopefully go get at bats, and that makes them better for the future. But I just don't know if there's a ton internally we can do, except for you guys hit the nail on the head with the approach. Like there's just way, 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 way too many strikeouts. And it seems like it comes in bunches with this team and in critical moments. And like you said, they're staring at pitches right down the middle. It's astounding how many cookies that they foul back. Then, the Angels are a good example. Willie Calhoun got one, hit a 2-run home run. Joe Dell got one, hit a 3-run home run. And so I feel like our opponents kind of show what you should do. You're not going to always do that. Obviously, baseball's a hard sport to play and execute at a high level every single time, but we're barely doing it at all. So I think approach needs to change. I don't think we're ever going to be a team this year where we don't strike out like in the bottom half of the league, but can we just get to a point where we're 5th or 6th, maybe? I think that would even help a ton. But I think primarily it's just got to be some external additions that can hopefully kind of just change the complexion of the offense. And sometimes you get a couple guys in there that do so, and it can lift, the guys that are here and around them. So I think that's kind of what we really have to hope happens to really help improve the offense in the second half.
Yeah. Yeah. I think honestly in 2024, I agree completely. I don't know if there's any internal options. I think the only reason why we're even having that conversation is because Jerry said that. And honestly, we're all just wincing and waiting for him to say that like Gregory Santos is our big trade deadline acquisition, right? Like he's pulled that crap before where, Jared Kelnick coming back from the cooler incident, he's our big, and I'm like, no, that's not how this works. Like add an actual bat internally. Who do we have? I mean, I agree. Locklear is probably the big obvious one for me where, having him up instead of Clase. And, obviously Ty France, unless they DFA him, which I wouldn't see them doing, just as him being a team leader and captain obviously JP's the captain, but, Ty's a big influence in the dugout as well. And I just look at it and go, yeah, Tyler Locklear could come up. We've seen what Bliss has done. We've seen what Clase has done. Bliss down in Tampa was tearing the cover off the ball and looked great. And then in typical Scott fashion, benched him for 2 weeks, right? There's so many times where I'm like, you're giving these rookies. I've never seen an organization treat rookies the way that Seattle does. It's crazy to me. They call them up. They make this whole big production. They take a video of them getting promoted and all this. They start them for 2 games. And if they aren't lightning in a bottle going 4 for 4, then they bench them. And I'm like, that isn't how you treat young talent, first of all. Second of all, that doesn't build any confidence in them. And now they're rotting on the bench and not getting any better when they could be down in AAA getting reps. So I would rather Ryan Bliss be down right now getting reps than sitting on the bench and pinch running once every 5th game and then starting. And then they're like, well, look at him. He's not hitting now. And I'm like, yeah, he's not hitting now. He hasn't seen a live pitch in 2 weeks. Of course he's not. And then they're going to put him in a game that the bases are loaded and it's a tie game. I could not believe that Scott did that, by the way. I'm just like, what are we doing? Like, you don't put a rookie in that spot. And especially when he hasn't seen live pitching for a couple weeks, like just either bring him up and let him play or leave him in AAA and go get some cheap talent off the DFA market, right? Like, I'd rather that. Like, go get Whit Merrifield right now. I'd rather them go get Whit Merrifield and then put Bliss back down in AAA until he's actually ready to play every day, or they're going to give him that opportunity. But I don't think that they're going to have any big internal options bat wise until 2025. Right. I think Cole Young has a legitimate chance at making the squad next year. If Lazaro Montes continues to do what he's doing, we might see him in 2025. Harry Ford, if he somehow stays in the organization, which I doubt, but if he does, we'll probably see him next year. Right. So a lot of those bats that everybody's waiting for, we're going to see. I don't think it would be this year. Like, unless Montes continues to bat like 330 from here till September, like maybe he's a September call up, but like, I'm not depending on that. I agree with you completely that the only way that this thing gets better is through an external option and multiple options. Like, I think if they only get one, like if they only go get Jazz, like that's not nearly enough. And I hope that they're smart enough to see that and know that. I do criticize them, but it is, like you said, Jake, like I want to be positive. I really do. But it's just when there's things that are mind numbing, I just think we get cute. It's the Robbie Ray Bullet situation where you could tell that situation came from 5 coaches sitting around in a lobby, in a hotel. And they're like, hey, what if we use Robbie Ray as a bullet? And I'm like, you just killed his confidence before the biggest game of Mariners history, right? At least in the current era, right? And you didn't tell him that he had enough confidence for him to go face this team that has shelled him all year. And then you're going to go put him in against the guy that literally shelled him all season as well. And then you throw him into the game in that spot. And you just look at it and you go, guys, like, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Like, I work in an office with guys that don't really know anything about baseball. We're watching the game because it was in the middle of the day, right? Because it was in Houston. And we're literally watching the game. And there's people that don't even know baseball that are like, why are they putting him in that spot? And I'm like, right. And so in the same regard with these internal options, it's like, don't mishandle the rookies. Don't mishandle the young guys that are coming up. You're killing their confidence when you call them up for 2 games and then they just sit on the bench for 2 weeks. Sorry, that's a total rant. Side note, my fault. My bad.
It's all good. Well, so yeah, I mean, I guess my take is I do think Tyler Locklear makes some sense. I think it was one of the Locked On guys, I don't remember who, said that Ty France technically could get optioned with it, and he couldn't like say no to it. So that's a thing, even though I don't think they will do that because Ty is too ingrained in the clubhouse culture, like you said. So I don't see that happening. And with Ryan Bliss, like it's hard because Polanco's looked better recently. I will say that. But I don't think you can put all your eggs in that basket anymore. I somewhat like the idea of Jazz. But then that would require you to probably move Polanco, in my opinion. And I do think Polanco is movable because he has the track record before he came to Seattle. So I could see a team biting on him. And I saw some people were like, why haven't you DFA'd Jorge Polanco? Well, they probably could get something in a trade for him. So it makes sense why they would rather hold on to him for a couple extra weeks to try to get something back.
He's going to shred, though. If you trade that fool, he's going to shred wherever he goes.
Just make sure it's a National League team.
Right. No kidding, man.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, once Jazz comes over, I could see Ryan Bliss maybe getting more reps since Jazz can also do outfield stuff too. But like you said, Jazz cannot be the number 1 bat you get. He has to be at most the second. I don't know who that first one is because I have my reservations about Robert. or Robert, however you say it. I don't think Vlad's going to be moved at the end of the day. So I don't know who that first is. I guess the only option really is Robert, but
I mean, Rooker, right? Rooker could be.
I really like the idea of Rooker, and someone brought it up to me the other day, and I once I thought about it, I really like the idea of Rooker. He's stated he likes hitting in Seattle, and I would like to have someone who likes hitting in Seattle more often than not, and he's hit really well. Now that obviously begs the question, what do you do with him positionally? Do you because he's mainly a DH. I mean, he can play outfield, and he's probably a better defender than Haniger at this point. So I guess that could work, but then you have to do something with Haniger. I think they should bite the bullet. I don't think they will. But that's kind of where I'm at internally and kind of just externally. I like the idea of Jazz. I like the idea of Rooker. So we'll see what they do. But we'll move into the last couple things. So this is a Twitter question from @SeattleKeith. If the Mariners do trade prospects for a big bat and it doesn't work out long term, either contract wise or they don't hit well in T-Mobile, would you consider it a total failure, or do you give some props to the front office for trying to improve at the deadline? Now, I think this is a pretty interesting question because I think you can make that case for Jorge Polanco. I mean, on paper, move made sense, and I liked the idea of it, and the trade was fine for the package. Obviously, he just hasn't hit well. So, yeah, what do you guys think as far as, like, do you still give the front office props if whoever we bring in doesn't perform well? And
Absolutely.
we'll start with
Yeah.
Trevor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I wasn't upset with their offseason. I didn't like how slow it was, but yeah, I agree with you. I think the Polanco acquisition was sound. I think the Garver acquisition was sound. I think the pitching additions that they brought in were really savvy, and they've worked for the most part. And I think right now, I think the fan base just wants to see them believe in the team, make some moves, push the chips in, and just see where it lands. And you know what? If we don't make the playoffs after doing that, then so be it. But if they don't try at all, that's a whole different conversation. So I give them props 100%. If they go in and they buy big, even if it's not Robert, I get it. That price tag is going to be big, but yeah, we're going to have to get rid of prospects anyway. The prospect clutching makes no sense. The best organizations in baseball don't clutch prospects. So I'd like us to eventually become a really a perennial competitive organization. And to do so, you got to make moves that are going to hurt, and you have to risk. The organizations across the league are not going to give you good players in return for nothing. That's not how this thing works. Like, you got to give to get. And I don't mind giving up an Arroyo, right? I don't mind giving up some of these names. Now, there's a couple untouchables. Now, that was a conversation a couple weeks ago that we saw running through Twitter. There's some untouchables in my head too. I don't want to see them move on from Montez. I don't want to see them move on from Cole Young. I don't want to see them move on from Colt Emerson. But to me, those are probably the only three, if I'm being honest, for me personally. I know Ethan disagrees with me, but those are my three. And so for me, is it worth it if they push all in, give up prospects, and it doesn't turn out? To me, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think, obviously if they go trade their top 8 prospects for Luis Robert, then it's a different story. But
Yeah.
I think, they absolutely need to try. And if the process is sound, I think, they should get, that's what they should do. So in terms of giving them props, I don't know about that, but you got a team here that's capable of winning the West there. They put themselves in position to do it. So I think for one, the fans kind of expect it. Like, hey, we need to go trade some prospects and get some veteran bats in here, some guys that can help the lineup. And I think even Trevor hit it on at the beginning of the podcast, but to send a lineup to the clubhouse too. They're like, hey, we believe in you guys. We traded some of our future assets to help this team in 2024. We know that over the long run, right, the numbers will probably work out that it's a bad trade, but like you said, you got to give to get. So I think, one, it's and most importantly, it's a signal to the clubhouse. We believe in you. Here's a couple extra pieces. And then, I think the fans too certainly expect and to deserve it now too. So I don't think there's really any time. It's certainly not the time now to be too concerned about, prospect hoarding. It's about how can we make the 24 team better and put ourselves in the best position to make a run at the World Series.
Yeah, and I think for me, as far as the question goes, I don't really think you need to give props or fault the front office. Like, if they were, let's say if they were to get Robert, I still don't know how to say it, Robert. If you get Robert, right, and he doesn't perform well in this second half of the season, I don't think you need to give props for getting him. I don't think you need to fault the front office for him not performing well, because I think it's just a matter of, like, it feels like a pretty obvious decision for me that they need to get pieces. Like, I don't think there's any debate whether they should sell or whether they should stay put or whether they should, but like, they need to get impact bats. And if you get a Robert and he doesn't perform, like, it's unfortunate. And it's also specifically unfortunate for the continuing trend that's going on in Seattle with these offensive pieces. But I don't feel like I need to be like, oh, well, Jerry, you tried your hardest. Like, he's doing his job. I don't need to pat him on the back because he went and got the obvious guy or Rooker or whatever. And especially if you're having that conversation on whether you should or not, if they get Robert and he doesn't perform, then okay, if you are one of the people saying, well, they failed, then who did you think they should have gotten? And how do you even know that they would have done the same thing or played better? Like, there's just we don't have a crystal ball. Most of those conversations already are on hindsight, which is just ultimately not fair to who you're talking about. So, especially when you're talking about guys like Polanco or whatever, like I mean, everyone on Twitter who said, I didn't like the Polanco trade, or you could have seen this coming, you're lying.
Lying.
It's not true, because he turned 3-0 instead of 2-9 on his MLB.com page. You cannot be like, oh, well, yep, that makes sense to me. That just isn't true. So I just don't even know if that conversation needs to be had, whether, oh, is it a failure or not? I think that would be ultimately a pretty futile, like, discussion in general. But to wrap this out, another Twitter question from @Gateway Falls. I think this was a really interesting one and one we need to talk about. If the M's don't make the playoffs, what should happen with Dipoto and Cervais? Do you stick with the plan, clean house, or what? So we'll start with MarinersSUR on this one.
Yeah, it's something I've thought quite a bit about. I think ultimately, like, if you look at kind of a macro level, I think Dipoto's done a fairly good job. We've got a really good farm system. They built this major league team that seems primed to go win, 87, 88 games every year. And so I think that's a good spot to be in an organization. It feels pretty sustainable. I think they're one of the best organizations in baseball at developing pitching talent and like identifying it. And so that's very, very important. There's a lot of organizations that do things a lot worse. But on the same token, you have, this farm system they've kind of built up twice, right? We have the Kirby, Gilbert, Cal, Julio kind of wave that came in and did, pretty well. That was, I think, a fairly big success. And now we have this next wave coming with Emerson, Young, Ford, Montez. So all really good. But, you also, with that foundation they built, you have to be able to get over the hump too. It's not good enough just to keep winning 87, 88 games and having these kind of misses in the off season that are preventing us from getting over the hump. So my hope is that the second half goes well. We go win 90 games. We win the AL West. We make a run in the playoffs, and it's an easy decision. But yeah, if we go out and we win 84, 85 games and miss the playoffs, I think it's probably time to make a change. And part of it is because I think the organization would still be in a good spot, and maybe it's just time to get a new set of eyes in place into how do we get over the hump. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but I do think it would be, in my opinion, time to kind of move forward. And I think, they'd probably go to another organization, and I would say they would be fairly lucky to have them because they've proven they can kind of build this team that's right on the edge of contention. And maybe this year they'll prove they can get over the hump, but I think they absolutely need to get over the hump in the last 65 games somehow.
I would say for Jerry and Scott, I've made some assumptions about them. I could be totally wrong. I'll just put that out there, but it does feel like they're linked together, right? I don't really foresee, like, everybody calling for Scott to get fired. I'm like, guys, there's no world that Jerry is going to fire him. With we've been over 500 the last 3 years, broke the drought, did all the things that he's done, has been there since the beginning of the rebuild, has done some really hard things, gone through some really hard seasons, made some really hard choices. Like, these guys aren't, like, Jerry's not going to fire Scott. I don't even think that's part of the mental calculus for him, if I'm being honest. So I guess my question goes to add on to the question from Twitter there is, are they both fired? Because I don't foresee Jerry firing Scott, and I don't foresee ownership keeping Scott and firing Jerry. I don't really see either of those things happening. So the question is, are they going to get rid of both of them if they don't miss the playoffs? I've already said earlier on this show, I think they do. I think if they miss the playoffs, I think they get let go. Now, whether that's warranted or not, that's more of a question. Like, what if they finish at 88 wins and miss the playoffs? Do they get fired? I think so. I think that would be completely, and I agree with you, Jake. I think they have the talent. That's, I think, why we're frustrated as fans. I think that's why we're actually super frustrated as fans, is because we know that they're capable. We know that they actually have the pieces to go do it without even adding anything. I think that's the frustrating part, is if everybody in that lineup just batted to their baseball card. We're not even asking them to be above what they've done their whole career. We're not asking for Jorge Polanco to have an all-career year. That's not what we're asking for. What we're saying is if Polanco has a career, or has a career average season, if Julio has a career average season, right? If JP has a career average season, this team looks drastically different, right? If Garver has a league average or a career average season, like, you add all those pieces, if everybody just plays to their baseball card, we're not even having this conversation right now, but we are, because all the pieces that you brought in aren't doing it. And then the core that we've built this team around, they aren't doing it either. And so, yeah, we're looking at this pitching lineup where, perfect example is yesterday. Logan goes out, throws a gem, gives up 0 runs, and we only need to cover 2 innings with the bullpen. And we have Andres Munoz in there for one of them, and we can't pull that win out because our offense just cannot procure more than 2 runs. We can't expect our bullpen to never give up runs. We can't. And so when I look at it through this lens of somebody has to be at fault, somebody does. And nobody likes having that conversation. It's not a fun conversation to have. But at the end of the day, it's not Brant Brown. We figured that out real fast, right? We had a little offensive spurt for like a week, and then that was gone. So is it Jerry? I doubt it's Jerry. Is it Scott? Is it their hitting coach? It's somebody. And if they don't make the playoffs, heads are going to roll. And I just don't foresee a situation where, 1, that won't happen, and 2, it won't be both of them. Because, like I said, I think they're attached at the hip. I could be wrong, but that's my impression.
Yeah. And I think another aspect we have to understand about this conversation is that Jerry or Scott or both could choose not to resign. They could choose that I don't want to be a part of this organization anymore and try out their prospects elsewhere. I specifically think Jerry probably has a case to do that because he's the one that keeps getting hamstrung by the owners. Because ultimately, the problem is not Jerry Dipoto and Scott Cervase. The problem is the ownership and the budget. That is what the problem is. Because I think if we had a budget of 180 whatever, like, this team is like probably still leading the division by 10 games. And it's just like, that's the thing, is Scott and Jerry aren't the ones that should be getting fired here, but that's ultimately what it would be. As far as Scott goes, like, obviously he makes some bad decisions, but I think every manager is going to make bad decisions. And I think especially when everyone is already so frustrated, it's easy to then latch onto a bad decision and make it seem like, it's a much bigger deal than it probably should be. Like the other night with pulling Logan or whatever. Like, hindsight is, Stanek, how would you know he's going to get injured? And granted, like, the real argument is, do you put Voth in? Which, yeah, he shouldn't have put Voth in. But the problem is that they shouldn't have been in that position to begin with.
Right.
By the offense. Okay.
on a bullpen day, by the way.
Yeah. And I have to give Scott credit where credit's due. The way he has managed the bullpen with the way it's been so far this year has ultimately been pretty damn good when you consider the context of, you lost Matt Brash for the whole season and Santos just came back. So you've had one high leverage reliever in Munoz. No one else is high leverage. Spire was, and then he stopped being it too. So you kind of lost Spire too. So you have to give him some credit there. And I mean, I don't know how much you can put onto him with like the offensive stuff. I said earlier, I do think regardless, the hitting department there needs to be massive changes this offseason, regardless if they make the playoffs or not. I think as far as Scott keeping his job, I think he's going to need he's going to need to make the playoffs and probably have it like a somewhat okay run. He can't just get swept in the first round or whatever. But I think that's the problem with that conversation is that Jerry and Scott could decide not to come back on their own. It doesn't even need to be a matter of will they get re-signed, because they could both just say, I'm done doing this here and I want to go somewhere else. And I'm sure there's other teams who would probably like to have DePoto, especially with how good he drafts and how good he's developing at pitching and all that. I mean, there's probably teams who wish they could spruce up their pitching and would love to have him. And, you know, at that point, you start having the conversation, if he goes, who do you get instead?
Right.
Like, I don't know. I'm not that smart, right? So it's just like, it's a tough conversation to have. I don't really know. I think if they fail to make the playoffs, like that's probably what's going to happen. I would be shocked if both of them kept their jobs. But then that's also a thing where like, do they even get offered jobs? If they do they even stay? I don't know. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to know what everyone thinks in the comments down below about any topic we've talked about today. I do appreciate MarinersSUR and Trevor from the Sodo Mojo Podcast for coming on. It's been very insightful to talk about all these things. It's really nice to have like that good sit down conversation about everything that's going on, to kind of give that like moment in time, this is what's going on now, and kind of figure out, once we do this, hopefully at the end of the season, maybe we'll be having different discussions and different tones about certain parts.
I certainly
hope in a positive way for sure. So yeah, Trevor, where can we find you? And I guess do your shouts outs.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we're just on X, we're at the Sodo Mojo Pod. And then, yeah, we're on every podcast platform at the Sodo Mojo Podcast. And yeah, go follow us on all of those things. We're building out more on YouTube every day and getting that going. But yeah, I appreciate any engagement and yeah, any follows, any comments, any of that. More than happy to respond and add any context. Also, we love it when people disagree with us, so it makes it more fun. So feel free to hop in and disagree.
And where can we find you, MarinersSUR?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. This was a ton of fun. But yeah, just on Twitter at MarinersSUR. I don't have an official podcast or anything, but I typically do a show once a week with Jay's Trident. So usually we'll post that like Monday morning. So that's where I am most regularly, and then yeah, on Twitter quite a bit as well, or X, I should say.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to that.
Yeah,
right.
It's like Safeco filled the T-Mobile. I still call it Safeco half the time.
I
It's
still
still
do
Twitter
it.
instead of
I
X.
still call it Twitter just because I want to. I don't want to call it X.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, obviously everyone's descriptions will be in the bio or I guess the description box of this video. Like it helps me out a lot. Subscribe to the channel and subscribe to Sodo Mojo Pod. Go follow MarinersSUR. Do all that good stuff and help them out there. But yeah, I appreciate everyone who stopped by and listened to this whole hour-long thing here. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me in this one. I will see you in the next.